Am I truly free to choose? Or am I just following habits? There is something almost sacred about our belief in free will. The conviction that we are the authors of our choices, the directors of our actions, the conscious agents steering the ship of our lives. Yet observe what actually happens in the moments when we believe we are choosing freely. A person reaches for their phone for the 15th time in an hour, not because they made a deliberate decision to check for messages, but because the hand moved automatically toward the familiar rectangle. The mind only retroactively constructs a reason. I should see if anything important came in. Someone opens the refrigerator, peers inside, closes it, then opens it again 30 seconds later, not from hunger, but from a pattern so ingrained it operates below conscious awareness. The story comes after. Maybe I missed something the first time. These micro-actions reveal something profound about the nature of choice. Much of what we experience as decision-making is actually the mechanical repetition of established patterns, with consciousness arriving after the fact to claim authorship. But this observation leads to an unsettling question. If so much of our behavior is automatic, where exactly does free will operate? Are we conscious agents making deliberate choices, or sophisticated biological machines following programming we mistake for personal agency? Watch the process of making a decision more closely. The impulse arises to eat, to speak, to move, to think about something. Often, action follows impulse so quickly that there seems to be no gap for choice. Yet consciousness constructs the narrative. I decided to have a snack, or I chose to call my friend. But what actually chose? And when did the choosing happen? Consider how preferences form. A child tries chocolate ice cream and enjoys it. This experience creates a neural pathway associating chocolate with pleasure. Years later, faced with ice cream flavors, the adult chooses chocolate. But is this choice, or is this the inevitable result of past conditioning playing out through present circumstances? The more we examine our choices, the more they reveal themselves as complex interactions between genetic predispositions, environmental influences, past experiences, chemical states, social pressures, and unconscious patterns. The chooser begins to seem like a convenient fiction, a story consciousness tells about processes that largely operate outside its control. Yet there is something undeniably real about the experience of choosing, the deliberation before making an important decision. The sense of agency when we act according to our values rather than our impulses. The feeling of responsibility that follows our actions. Perhaps the question is not whether we have free will, but what we mean by we and what we mean by will. If we refers to the ego, the constructed sense of separate self with its preferences and desires, then our freedom is indeed limited. This self is largely a product of conditioning, biological, psychological, social, cultural. Its choices emerge from the interplay of forces mostly beyond conscious control. But what if we refers to something deeper? What if consciousness itself has a quality of freedom that operates differently than ego-based choosing? Watch what happens in moments of genuine spontaneity. A creative insight arises from nowhere. A compassionate response emerges naturally in a difficult situation. A solution appears without thinking. These moments don't feel like products of the conditioned self making calculated decisions. They feel like expressions of a different kind of intelligence. This intelligence doesn't seem to choose in the way the ego chooses, through weighing options, calculating outcomes, protecting interests. It responds freshly to what the situation requires, without reference to past patterns or future projections. Children often demonstrate this quality. Their responses are immediate, unpremeditated, uncalculated. They haven't yet learned to filter every impulse through layers of conditioning and social appropriateness. Their actions arise from presence rather than pattern. But as we mature, we learn to distrust spontaneity. We develop strategies, build defenses, create systems for managing life. These patterns become so habitual that we mistake them for our true nature. We forget the possibility of responding from freshness rather than familiarity. The interesting discovery is that awareness of conditioning can itself create freedom. When we see our patterns clearly, the automatic reactions, the unconscious choices, the mechanical repetitions, something in us becomes free from them. This is not the freedom to control or manipulate our conditioning, but the freedom to no longer be unconsciously driven by it. The habit pattern continues, but it no longer has the same unconscious power. Choice becomes possible in the space of awareness. A person notices their tendency to reach for their phone when anxious. The awareness doesn't eliminate the impulse, but it creates a moment of space. In that space, something other than conditioned reaction becomes possible. Not necessarily different action, but conscious action. This is perhaps what true freedom looks like. Not the ego's fantasy of total control over circumstances, but consciousness functioning clearly, responding appropriately, acting from awareness rather than automaticity. From this perspective, the question shifts from am I free to choose to what chooses, and from what quality of consciousness does choice arrive. The conditioned self will continue making choices based on preferences, aversions, habits, and desires. But when these choices are made in the light of awareness, they become expressions of freedom rather than mechanical reactions. The free action is not necessarily different from the conditioned action. Someone might still choose chocolate ice cream or reach for their phone. But the quality of the choosing changes completely. It becomes conscious rather than compulsive, present rather than mechanical, alive rather than automatic. Can you distinguish between choices that arise from conditioning and choices that arise from awareness? Can you notice the difference between mechanical reaction and conscious response? Can you find the freedom that exists not in controlling outcomes, but in being present to the process of choosing itself? What is this that chooses without being bound by choice? This freedom that operates through conditioning without being limited by it? This consciousness that can act spontaneously while being fully aware of all the forces at play?